A disguised prince falls in love with a maid, but discovers she knows the truth about his throne. Before we begin, tell us in the comments, what is the biggest secret you've ever had to keep? And at the end of the story, don't forget to rate it from 0 to 10. Enjoy. Prince Alastair of Eldoria was suffocating in silk. He stood on the grand balcony of the royal palace, a polite, practiced smile fixed on his face as he watched the perfectly manicured gardens fill with an endless stream of dukes, duchesses, and foreign dignitaries. Each of them approached him with the same fawning reverence, their eyes full of a hunger for influence, for proximity to the throne. He felt less like a man, and more like a monument, a cold stone symbol of a legacy he had never chosen. "You look pleased, Your Highness," his chief advisor, Lord Harrington, murmured beside him. Harrington was a man who had served the crown for 40 years, a man who saw duty as the highest and only virtue. "I am the very picture of princely delight," Alastair replied, his voice a low, ironic murmur that only Harrington could hear. "Inside, however, I am composing a rather tragic opera about a man who drowns in a sea of tiny, excruciatingly boring cucumber sandwiches." Harrington sighed, a sound of long-suffering patience. "Alastair, this is the annual garden gala. It is a vital part of your duty. You are to be charming, to listen to the Minister of Agriculture's concerns about grain tariffs, and to dance with Lady Annabel, whose father controls the shipping lanes." "Lady Annabel?" Alastair mused, glancing at the young woman in question, who was laughing in a way that was perfectly beautiful and utterly devoid of genuine joy. "She looks at me as if I am a merger to be acquired. They all do." He turned to Harrington, the fake smile finally dropping from his face, revealing the deep, restless wariness in his eyes. "When was the last time someone looked at me, Harrington? Not the Prince of Eldoria, not the future king, but just me." Harrington had no answer. He was a man of protocols, not of feelings. That night, Alastair made a decision. It was a reckless, impulsive decision, born from years of quiet desperation. He was tired of being a symbol. He wanted, just for a little while, to be a man. He waited until the palace was asleep. He shed his fine silk robes and donned the simple, rough-spun clothes of a stable hand he had procured from a sympathetic old servant. He left a simple, cryptic note on his desk, packed a small leather satchel with a few coins and a loaf of bread, and slipped out of the palace through a forgotten servant's passage. He was no longer Prince Alastair. He was just Alex. A man with no past and an uncertain future, walking into the sprawling, anonymous city that lay beyond the palace walls. His plan, if one could call it that, was simple. He would find work, honest, physical work. He wanted to feel the ache of tired muscles, the simple satisfaction of a day's labor. He wanted to be invisible, to be judged not by his title, but by the strength of his back and the calluses on his hands. Calluses he had yet to earn. After 2 days of sleeping in cheap inns and being turned away from a dozen jobs due to his suspiciously soft hands and complete lack of practical skills, he found himself at the back entrance of the Grand Majestic Hotel. It was one of the oldest and most luxurious establishments in the capital, a place he had attended countless state dinners in. Now he was standing at the service entrance, asking for a job. The head stableman, a gruff, barrel-chested man named Barnaby, looked him up and down with deep suspicion. "You ever mucked out a stall, city boy?" "No, sir," Alex replied honestly. "Ever saddled a horse?" "I have ridden them." Alex offered, which was technically true. Barnaby snorted. "Riding is the easy part. It's the work that gets you. But my nephew broke his leg, and I'm desperate. You're strong enough. You start tomorrow. 5 a.m. Don't be late, and don't break any of the horses. They're worth more than you are." The next morning, Alex discovered that mucking out a stall was in fact far less glamorous than state dinners. His muscles screamed in protest, his hands were already blistering, and the smell was something no amount of royal upbringing could prepare him for. He was clumsy, inefficient, and utterly lost. He was trying to saddle a fiery black mare named Shadow, a notoriously difficult horse, when the disaster happened. He fumbled with the complex web of straps, and the heavy leather saddle slipped, landing in the hay with a dull thud. The mare, startled, reared up, her powerful hooves flashing in the dim light of the stables. "Whoa, easy there," Alex said, stumbling backward, his heart pounding. "You're doing it all wrong," a quiet, firm voice said from behind him. He turned to see a young woman standing there. She was a maid, judging by her simple gray and white uniform, and she was holding a bucket of water. She wasn't classically beautiful like the ladies at court, but her face had a striking, intelligent quality, with high cheekbones, a determined chin, and dark, observant eyes that seemed to see everything. She looked at him not with deference, but with a kind of calm, unimpressed assessment. "She doesn't like the bit pulled so tight," the maid said, setting her bucket down. "And you've got the girth strap twisted." She walked past him, her movements confident and unafraid. She murmured a few soft words to the horse in a language Alex didn't recognize, and the mare, which had been agitated and wild, calmed instantly, nuzzling its head against her shoulder. With a series of quick, expert movements, she untangled the straps, settled the saddle onto the horse's back, and tightened it with a practiced ease. "There," she said, patting the mare's neck. "That's how you treat a lady, with respect, not with force." Alex stood there, completely stunned, feeling like the world's biggest fool. "How did you?" "I grew up on a farm," she said, wiping her hands on her apron. "Horses have more common sense than most people I've met." She looked at his blistered hands. "You're new here, aren't you?" "Is it that obvious?" he asked, a wry smile touching his lips. "You hold a shovel like it's a foreign object, and you smell faintly of expensive soap," she said, her own lips twitching with a hint of a smile. "I'm Serafina, but everyone calls me Sarah." "Alex," he replied, offering a hand that was now covered in hay and grime. She shook it without hesitation. Her grip was firm, her hand calloused. "Well, Alex, who smells of soap," she said, picking up her bucket. "Try listening to the horses. They'll tell you what they need if you're quiet enough to hear it." She turned and walked away, leaving him alone in the quiet stable. He watched her go, a strange feeling stirring in his chest. In the palace, women curtsied. They simpered. They agreed with everything he said. No woman had ever looked at him with such calm, unimpressed competence. No one had ever corrected him, taught him something, and then simply walked away as if he were just another person. It was infuriating, and it was utterly, intoxicatingly fascinating. Over the next few weeks, Alex and Sarah settled into a strange, unspoken friendship. Their paths would cross in the early mornings, in the quiet, behind-the-scenes world of the hotel staff. He would be finishing his work in the stables, she would be starting hers in the kitchens or the laundry. He learned to do his job, his hands slowly hardening, his muscles growing accustomed to the work. But he also learned by watching her. He saw the way she treated everyone, from the head chef to the youngest busboy, with the same quiet, steady respect. He saw the way she would leave a small flower on the cart of the elderly laundry woman who was having a bad day. He saw her sharing her own meager lunch with a stray cat that lived near the kitchens. She was a small, steady point of kindness in a world that was often harsh and unforgiving. Their conversations were brief, stolen moments. But in those moments, he found himself being more honest than he had ever been in his life. He was not a prince, he was just Alex, the clumsy stable hand, and she was not just a maid, she was Sarah, the woman with the wise eyes and the quiet strength. "You think a lot, don't you?" she asked him one morning as they sat on a hay bale, sharing a warm loaf of bread she had brought from the kitchen. "Too much, probably," he admitted. "I spend a lot of time thinking about duty, about the difference between the life you're given and the life you choose." She looked at him, her gaze thoughtful. "Sometimes," she said, tearing a piece of bread, "the duty isn't to the life you're given. It's the duty to yourself, to choose a life that is true." Her words were simple, but they struck him with the force of a profound philosophical truth. Who was this woman? This maid who spoke of duty and truth as if she had debated with scholars? He started to notice other things. He saw her once in the hotel library, not cleaning, but reading. She was so engrossed in a thick, leather-bound book of history that she didn't even notice him pass. He saw her speaking to a group of foreign hotel guests, switching effortlessly between 3 different languages to help them with directions. The mystery of her deepened with each passing day. She was a maid, yes, but she was so much more. There was a depth to her, a hidden world of knowledge and wisdom that she kept carefully veiled. One rainy afternoon, He found her in an empty tack room, carefully polishing a set of old silver bridles. "You know," he said, leaning against the doorframe, "you're not like any maid I've ever met." She looked up, a small, enigmatic smile on her face. "And you," she replied, her eyes twinkling, "are not like any stable hand I've ever met." He felt a jolt, a flicker of panic. Did she know? Had she somehow figured out who he was? "What do you mean?" he asked, trying to keep his voice casual. "You speak like a nobleman," she said, her gaze direct and unwavering. "You carry yourself like someone who is used to being obeyed, and you talk about duty like a man who has felt the weight of a crown on his head." He was speechless. The air in the small room grew thick with unspoken secrets. He had come here to be invisible, to escape the burden of his identity. But it seemed that in the quiet, observant eyes of a simple hotel maid, he had never been more clearly seen. The truth about her throne, the one she supposedly knew, suddenly felt a lot closer, and a lot more dangerous than he could have ever imagined. Alistair's heart hammered against his ribs. Her words, calm and deliberate, had shattered the carefully constructed illusion of Alex. He had come to the city to be anonymous, to be a blank slate, and in a single quiet observation, she had sketched his entire portrait. "I don't know what you're talking about," he said, the denial sounding weak even to his own ears. It was a lie, and they both knew it. Serafina didn't press. She didn't call him a liar. She just continued to polish the silver bridle, her movements methodical and unhurried. "Don't you?" she asked softly, not looking at him. "A man who speaks of the weight of a crown is either a poet or a prince, and you don't have the ink-stained fingers of a poet." He was caught, completely and utterly. He had been so focused on discovering her secrets, he had never considered that his own were so transparent. "Who are you?" he asked, his voice low, a mixture of suspicion and a new, grudging respect. She finally looked up, her dark eyes holding his. "I'm the person who knows that the royal seal of Eldoria is a lion and a rose intertwined. I'm the person who knows that the current prince has a small, faint scar above his right eyebrow from a childhood fencing accident." She paused, her gaze flicking to the exact spot on his forehead. "And I'm the person who knows that he often escapes the palace in disguise because the weight of his crown is indeed very heavy." The detailed, intimate knowledge she possessed was a physical blow. She didn't just suspect, she knew. This wasn't a lucky guess. This was information. "How?" was all he could manage. "I told you," she said, a sad, knowing smile on her face. "I grew up on a farm, but I didn't tell you where that farm was." She set down the bridle and stood up, her posture regal in a way that had nothing to do with her simple maid's uniform. "My family's farm borders the royal estates to the north. My grandfather was the royal huntsman for your grandfather, the old king. My father served as a groundskeeper at the palace for 20 years. I grew up in the shadow of those walls, Alex. Or should I say, Your Highness?" The world seemed to tilt. She wasn't just a maid. She was a daughter of the palace grounds, a part of the very world he had tried to escape. He had run from his gilded cage only to land in the arms of someone who knew its every bar. "You knew from the beginning," he said, the realization dawning on him, "from the moment you saw me in the stables." "I suspected," she corrected. "You have your father's eyes. It was the soap that confirmed it. No stable hand in the entire kingdom can afford triple-milled lavender soap." He felt a strange mixture of anger and a bizarre, liberating relief. The lie was over. "Why didn't you say anything? Why didn't you expose me?" "Expose you for what?" she asked, her voice genuine. "For wanting to be a normal person for a little while? For wanting to know what it feels like to earn your bread with the sweat of your own brow? That's not a crime, Your Highness. In some parts of the world, they call that a virtue." She picked up her cleaning bucket. "Your secret is safe with me. I have no interest in the politics of the court. I'm just here to do my job." She turned to leave, but he stopped her, his hand gently touching her arm. "Wait, Sarah, please." She paused, looking at his hand on her arm, then back at his face. "Don't call me Your Highness," he said, his voice pleading. "Not you, to you. I just want to be Alex." She studied him for a long, silent moment, her dark eyes searching his. Finally, she gave a small, almost imperceptible nod. "All right, Alex," she said softly. "But be careful. Pretending to be someone else is easy. It's remembering who you are when the game is over that's the hard part." She slipped her arm from his grasp and walked out of the tack room, leaving him alone with the smell of leather and hay and the dizzying realization that his escape had just become infinitely more complicated and infinitely more interesting. Their relationship transformed overnight. The unspoken secret was now a shared one, a fragile, invisible thread that connected them. The pretense was gone, but in its place was a new, more complex dance. He knew that she knew. She knew that he knew. And this shared knowledge created a new kind of intimacy, a dangerous and thrilling one. Their conversations became a game of subtle truths and careful omissions. "Had a tough day?" she asked him one morning, handing him a warm pastry she had saved from the kitchen. He had been particularly quiet, a dark mood clinging to him like the morning mist. "You could say that," he replied, accepting the pastry. "I had a disagreement with my foreman." He was, of course, referring to Lord Harrington, who had sent a series of increasingly frantic messages demanding to know the prince's whereabouts. "A good foreman knows when to guide and when to give space," Sarah replied, her eyes full of a knowing sympathy. "A bad one just pulls on the reins until the horse rebels." "This one," Alex said with a sigh, "is a master of the reins." He found himself confiding in her, using the thin veil of their work identities to talk about the very real pressures of his life. He told her about the arranged marriage his council was trying to force on him with a princess from a neighboring kingdom, referring to it as a merger his boss was pushing for. "She sounds efficient," Sarah had said, after he described the princess, a woman known for her political acumen and complete lack of a sense of humor. "She is," Alex had agreed. "Our union would be a brilliant strategic alliance. It would also be a barren desert of joyless duty." "Sometimes," Sarah had replied, her gaze distant, "the most strategic alliance is the one you make with your own heart." He was constantly amazed by her wisdom, a wisdom that seemed to come from a place far deeper than her years. He started to see her not just as a confidant, but as an advisor, the only one he had whose counsel wasn't colored by political ambition or courtly protocol. But as his admiration for her grew, so did his curiosity. She knew his secret, but she held her own close. He knew her history with the palace grounds, but he didn't know her. He didn't know why a woman with her intelligence, her grace, her multilingual abilities was content to be a maid in a hotel. He tried to probe, gently. "You said your father was a groundskeeper," he said one afternoon, as they were grooming the horses side by side. "Did you ever want to work at the palace yourself?" A shadow passed over her face, a fleeting cloud that she quickly chased away. "The palace is a beautiful place to look at from a distance," she said, her voice carefully neutral. "But it's not a place for people like me." "What does that mean, people like you?" "People who prefer truth to flattery," she replied, her tone leaving no room for further questions. The mystery of Serafina only deepened. He knew he was falling for her, a feeling that was both terrifying and inevitable. He loved her quiet strength, her sharp wit, her unwavering moral compass. He loved the way she could calm a nervous horse with a single touch, the way she spoke to the kitchen staff with the same respect she showed the hotel manager, the way her eyes lit up when she talked about the history of the city. He found himself inventing reasons to be near her, to extend their brief conversations. He would deliberately forget how to do a simple task in the stables, just so she would have to come and show him, her hands brushing against his as she guided him. He would linger in the kitchens after his shift, hoping to catch her as she was finishing hers, just to walk with her to the service exit. One evening, he waited for her by the back gate. The city was beginning to light up, the sky a deep, bruised purple. "Let me walk you home," he said, the words coming out before he could stop them. She looked at him, her expression unreadable in the twilight. "You don't even know where I live." "Then show me," he said. She hesitated for a moment, then nodded. They walked in a comfortable silence through the bustling city streets, away from the grandeur of the hotel district and into a quieter, older part of the city, a neighborhood of brick tenements and small family-owned shops. Her home was a small, clean apartment above a bakery. It was a single room, but it was filled with books, with plants, and with a sense of peaceful, lived-in warmth. It was a world away from his cold, echoing palace. "It's not much," she said, a little self-consciously, as she lit a small oil lamp. "It's a home," he replied, looking around. "Mine is just a collection of very expensive, very empty rooms." He stayed for tea. They sat at her small wooden table, and for the first time there were no secrets, no disguises, no unspoken truths between them. They were just Alex and Sarah, a man and a woman in a small, quiet room, the scent of baking bread wafting up from the floor below. He didn't want to leave. He had never felt so at peace, so completely himself. As the night grew late, he knew he had to go. He stood at her door, the narrow hallway feeling charged with a new, more potent energy. "Sarah," he began, his voice low. "Don't," she whispered, her eyes pleading. "Don't say it." "Why?" "Because if you say it, everything changes," she said, her voice full of a sadness he didn't understand. "And we can't. It's impossible." "Nothing is impossible," he said, his princely arrogance flaring for a moment. "Some things are," she replied, a finality in her tone that chilled him. "There are things you don't know, Alex, secrets that are far bigger than a prince in disguise." He looked at her, at the deep, ancient pain in her eyes, and he realized that he had only scratched the surface of the mystery of Serafina. He had discovered her secret, but he had no idea what it truly meant. And he knew, with a sinking feeling, that the truth she spoke of, the truth about his throne, was not a simple piece of information. It was a barrier, a wall between them that might be too high for even a prince to climb. Alistair left Sarah's apartment that night with a heart full of warring emotions. He was more in love with her than ever, captivated by her strength and her mystery. But he was also deeply frustrated, haunted by her words. Secrets that are far bigger than a prince in disguise. What could be bigger than the heir to the throne of Eldoria hiding his identity? He returned to the Grand Majestic Hotel, not as Alex the stable hand, but as Prince Alistair on a covert mission. He couldn't go back to the palace yet, not until he understood the full scope of the game he was in. He rented a discreet suite under a false name, a base of operations from which he could begin his own investigation into the one person who had managed to completely capture his heart and his mind. He started with what he knew. Her family had served the crown for generations. He sent a coded message to the one person in the palace he knew he could trust implicitly. A retired Royal Guard captain named Marcus, a man who had been a friend of his father's and who valued loyalty to the true spirit of Eldoria above all else. "Marcus," the message read, "I need the service records of the royal huntsman who served my grandfather and the groundskeeper who served my father. The family name is a common one, so I need the full history. Discretion is paramount." While he waited for Marcus's reply, his days at the hotel became a strange dual existence. By day, he was Alex, the stable hand, mucking out stalls and learning the rhythms of an honest day's work. He would see Sarah, and their interactions were now tinged with a painful, poignant tension. They were friends, they were allies in their shared secret, but the invisible wall she had erected between them was solid and real. She was polite, she was kind, but she was distant, her eyes holding a sadness he couldn't penetrate. He tried to talk to her, to understand. "Sarah," he said one afternoon, catching her as she was leaving the laundry. "Tell me what's wrong. Let me help." "There is nothing you can do," she had replied, her voice gentle but firm. "This is not your battle to fight, Alex. It's mine." Her refusal to let him in only fueled his determination. He had spent his life surrounded by people who wanted to use him for his power and influence. Sarah was the first person who actively pushed him away, who insisted on fighting her own battles, and it made him want to fight for her even more. His nights were spent as the prince. He would retreat to his hotel suite and pore over historical documents, city records, anything that could give him a clue about the secret she was protecting. He learned about her life, her quiet, studious childhood on the edge of the royal estates, her academic brilliance, her reputation for being a fierce, loyal friend. But he found no scandal, no crime, no hidden debt. Her life was as clean and as honorable as she was. The mystery only deepened. The first piece of the puzzle arrived a week later. A sealed envelope was delivered to his suite. It was from Marcus. Inside were the service records he had requested. He read through them, his heart pounding. Sarah's grandfather, a decorated and respected huntsman. Her father, a diligent and loyal groundskeeper who had received multiple commendations for his work. But then he found it. Tucked into the back of her father's file was a small, almost overlooked addendum. Subject: service termination. Reason: accusation of treason. Alistair felt the blood drain from his face. Treason. It was the most serious crime in the kingdom, punishable by death or lifelong exile. The file was thin on details. It simply stated that Sarah's father had been accused of passing sensitive information about the king's movements to a faction of dissident nobles. The evidence was listed as irrefutable, but the details were sealed by royal decree. Her father had been stripped of his position, his home, his honor, and his entire family had been quietly exiled from the palace grounds, their names effectively erased from the royal records. It had happened 15 years ago, when Sarah was just a girl. Suddenly everything made sense. Her reluctance to talk about the palace, her statement that it was not a place for people like her. Her quiet, fierce independence. She was the daughter of a man branded a traitor. She carried the weight of that shame, that injustice, every single day. But Alistair knew his father. King Theron was a just man, a good man. He would not have condemned someone without absolute proof. What had really happened 15 years ago? The pressure from the outside world was mounting. Lord Harrington's messages were becoming more frequent, more demanding. The council was growing restless. The proposed marriage to Princess Isolde of the neighboring kingdom of Lyria was a crucial political alliance, and Alistair's continued absence was threatening to derail the entire negotiation. Alistair. Harrington's latest message read, "The Lyrian delegation arrives in 2 weeks. Your presence is no longer a request, it is a command. You must return to the palace. You must do your duty." Duty. The word felt like a chain around his neck. His duty was to his kingdom, to his people. But his heart was in a small, cramped apartment above a bakery with a woman who believed their love was impossible. He knew he couldn't stay hidden forever. He had to go back, but he couldn't go back without the truth. He decided to confront Sarah, not with an accusation, but with an offer of help. He found her in the hotel's rooftop garden, a small, forgotten space where she sometimes went to read during her breaks. "I know," he said, his voice quiet as he approached her. She was sitting on a stone bench, a book open on her lap, but he could tell she wasn't reading. She looked up, her expression guarded. "You know what? About your father," he said gently. "About the accusation. I had his service records pulled." The color drained from her face. She closed her book, her hands clutching it like a shield. "You had no right." "I know," he said, sitting on the bench opposite her, "but I had to understand. I had to know what was standing between us." He leaned forward, his eyes pleading. "Sarah, I don't believe it. I don't believe your father was a traitor." Her carefully constructed composure began to crack. Tears welled in her eyes, tears of a grief and an anger she had held inside for 15 years. "It doesn't matter what you believe," she whispered, her voice choked with emotion. "It's what the world believes. My father's name was destroyed. Our family was cast out, shamed. He died a broken man, always protesting his innocence, but no one would listen." "I'm listening now," Alistair said, his voice firm. "Let me help you. I can reopen the investigation. I can access the sealed records. We can find the truth. We can clear his name." She looked at him, a storm of hope and fear warring in her eyes. "Why would you do that? You are the son of the king who condemned him. Your family is the reason for my family's ruin." "Because I love you," he said, the words simple, direct, and utterly true. "And because I believe that justice is more important than any royal decree." He reached out not to touch her, but to offer a hand, palm up, a gesture of partnership. "Let me fight with you, Sarah. We can do this together." She stared at his outstretched hand for a long, long time. The desire to accept, to finally share this impossible burden, was overwhelming. But so was the fear. What if they dug up the past only to find that the official story was true? What if, in trying to clear her father's name, they only confirmed his guilt? And what of the truth she knew? The one about his throne? It was a secret intertwined with her father's fate, a truth so dangerous it could not only destroy her, but could tear the entire kingdom apart. "You don't understand, Alex," she said, pulling her hands into her lap. The truth is more complicated than you can ever imagine." Before he could press her, a shadow fell over them. "Your Highness," a cold, familiar voice said. Alistair looked up. Lord Harrington stood there, flanked by 2 royal guards, his face a mask of grim satisfaction. "Your little holiday is over," Harrington said, his eyes flicking to Sarah with disdain. "The king commands your immediate return to the palace. It is time to do your duty." The game was over. Alex the stable hand was gone, and Prince Alastair of Eldoria was being summoned back to his gilded cage, leaving the woman he loved and the mystery of her past behind him. The return to the palace was as suffocating as Alastair had feared. He was immediately swept up in a whirlwind of state dinners, council meetings, and endless preparations for the arrival of the Lyrian delegation. He was once again a monument, a symbol, his every move watched and managed by Harrington. He tried to continue his investigation from within the palace walls, but every door was closed to him. The sealed records of Sarah's father's trial were kept in the royal archives, a place to which only the king and his most trusted advisors had access. When he requested the files, Harrington had stonewalled him. "It is a closed matter, Your Highness," he had said, his tone leaving no room for argument. "Revisiting it would be a sign of instability. It would be unwise." Alastair felt like a prisoner in his own home. He was surrounded by power, but he had none. His only connection to the outside world, to Sarah, was through the coded messages he managed to send via Marcus. "She is safe," Marcus had replied. "But she is being watched. Harrington has his eyes everywhere." He knew he had to see her. He couldn't fight this battle alone, separated by palace walls. He had to convince her to trust him, to tell him the full story. He used the one thing he had left, his knowledge of the palace's secrets. One moonless night, he once again donned the simple clothes of a commoner and slipped out through a secret tunnel, the same one his grandfather had used for his own clandestine meetings. He found Sarah at the bakery where she now worked part-time. The shop was closed, but a soft light glowed from the back room. He tapped on the window, and she opened the door, her face a mixture of shock and a fear he didn't understand. "What are you doing here?" she whispered, pulling him inside. "It's not safe. They're watching you." "I don't care," he said, his eyes searching hers. "I had to see you. Sarah, you have to tell me the truth. All of it. What is the secret that is so big, so dangerous, that you would rather live with this injustice than fight it?" She looked at him, her heart in her eyes, a lifetime of pain and fear warring with the love she so clearly felt for him. "Because, Alex," she said, her voice a trembling whisper, "the treason my father was accused of, it wasn't about selling secrets to nobles." "Then what was it about?" She took a deep, shaky breath, and the words she spoke next shattered the very foundations of his world. "It was about you," she said. "He was accused of treason because he discovered the truth about your birth. The truth about your claim to the throne." Alastair felt as if the floor of the small bakery had fallen away, leaving him in a dizzying, bottomless void. The words Sarah had spoken seemed to hang in the air, sharp and glittering and impossibly heavy. "The truth about your claim to the throne." What are you saying?" he stammered, the words feeling foreign in his own mouth. His entire life, his identity, everything he had ever known was built on one unshakable fact. He was the prince, the sole heir to the throne of Eldoria. Seraphina's face was pale in the dim light of the bakery, her eyes filled with a deep, sorrowful empathy. She knew the weight of the words she had just delivered. "Sit down, Alex," she said gently, her voice a soft anchor in his spinning world. She led him to a small wooden table, the same one where she kneaded dough every morning, and pushed him into a chair. She took a deep, steadying breath and began to tell the story. The real story. The one her father had died to protect. 15 years ago, she began, her voice a low, hushed murmur, "My father was not just a groundskeeper. He was one of the few people your father, the king, truly trusted. They had grown up together on these lands. He had access to the private royal chambers, not just to tend the gardens, but as a friend." Alastair listened, his mind struggling to reconcile this image with the formal, distant king he had always known. "Your mother, the queen," Sarah continued, her voice softening, "was a beautiful, kind woman. But she was also very frail, especially after you were born. The birth was difficult, and she never fully recovered. She was often sick, confined to her chambers. My father, he would sometimes bring her wildflowers from the estate, trying to bring a piece of the outside world to her. He was loyal to her, to your father, to the crown." She paused, gathering her courage. The king and queen loved each other deeply, but they had a secret, a heartbreaking one. After your difficult birth, the royal physicians told them that the queen could never have another child. And your father? He needed a secure line of succession, an heir and a spare. It was the one duty he placed above all others. Alistair felt a cold dread creeping up his spine. He knew with a horrifying certainty where this story was going. The king, Sarah said, her voice dropping to a near whisper, had an affair. It was not a thing of passion, but of duty. A secret, calculated decision. He chose a woman from a noble but distant and impoverished family, someone who would be grateful, discreet, and would understand the terms. She was brought to a secluded estate. She gave birth to a second son, and then she was sent away, paid handsomely for her silence and her service to the crown. A second son, Alistair repeated, the words tasting like ash. I have a brother. You did, Sarah corrected gently, her eyes full of pain. He was raised in secret in that secluded estate by a team of tutors and governesses. He was the king's spare, the insurance policy. No one was ever supposed to know. But my father, your father discovered this. Alistair pieced together, his mind racing. Sarah nodded. He overheard a conversation. He saw a document he wasn't meant to see. He pieced it all together, and his conscience wouldn't let him rest. He believed that the people of Eldoria had a right to know the true line of succession. He believed that a kingdom built on a lie was a kingdom built on sand. So he tried to expose it, Alistair whispered. He tried to speak to the king first, she said, to convince him to tell the truth. But your father saw it not as an act of loyalty, but as a threat. And Lord Harrington saw it as an opportunity. She looked at him, her eyes burning with the memory of the injustice. Harrington was the one who framed him. He twisted my father's discovery into an act of treason. He fabricated evidence, coerced witnesses. He convinced the king that my father was trying to use the information to destabilize the throne, to support the dissident nobles. So your father chose to believe the lie, Sarah finished for him. Perhaps because it was easier, perhaps because he was afraid. He exiled my father, erased his name, and buried the secret of his other son so deep that he thought it would never see the light of day. Alistair sat in the silence, the weight of a generation of secrets pressing down on him. He had a brother, or had had one. A brother raised in secret, a living ghost in the history of his family. And Sarah's father, a good and honorable man, had been destroyed for knowing the truth. What happened to him? Alistair asked, his voice raw. My brother. Sarah looked down at her hands. That is the greatest tragedy of all, she said softly. A year after my father was exiled, there was a fire at the estate where the boy was being raised. It was a terrible accident. The boy, he didn't survive. He was only a child. The pain of that revelation was a physical blow. A brother he had never known, life extinguished before it had ever truly begun. And the secret had died with him, buried under the weight of a king's guilt and an advisor's ambition. So the throne, my claim. Alistair struggled to articulate the question that was at the core of his new, shattered reality. Your claim is legitimate, Alex, Sarah said, using his chosen name with a deep, comforting empathy. You were always the firstborn, the true heir. The other boy was the spare. But the secret is the lie the crown was built on for the past 15 years. The secret is the injustice that was done to my father. And that, she said, finally looking him in the eye, is why I could never be with you. How could I, the daughter of the man branded a traitor, ever stand beside the son of the king who betrayed him? Our love story was written by our father's tragedy. It was impossible from the start. He finally understood. He understood her distance, her sadness, her insistence that they could never be. It wasn't about their different stations in life. It was about the chasm of history, of blood and betrayal, that lay between their two families. He stood up and began to pace the small bakery, his mind a whirlwind. He felt a storm of emotions, grief for the brother he never knew, rage at Harrington for his deceit, a deep, aching sorrow for Sarah and her family. But underneath it all, a new, hard resolve began to form. No, he said, stopping in front of her. It is not impossible. She looked at him, her eyes wide with a mixture of fear and hope. You said your father died to protect the truth. he said, his voice ringing with a newfound authority that had nothing to do with his title and everything to do with his character. You said he believed a kingdom built on a lie was a kingdom built on sand, and he was right. He knelt down in front of her, taking her hands in his. I will not rule a kingdom built on the sand of my father's lies and your father's suffering. I will not wear a crown that was polished with the tears of your family. What are you going to do? She whispered. I'm going to do what your father tried to do, he declared. I'm going to tell the truth. All of it. I will clear your father's name, I will expose Harrington, and I will tell the world the story of the brother I never knew. I will tear down the old foundation and we will build a new one, a kingdom based on truth, on justice, and on honor. Alex, you can't, she said, her voice full of fear for him. They will destroy you. Harrington, the council, your own father, they will see this as the ultimate act of treason. You will lose everything, the throne, your title, your future. I have already lost everything that matters by living a lie, he said, his gaze intense and unwavering, and I will not lose you. He squeezed her hands. But I cannot do this alone, Sarah. You said this was not my battle to fight, but it is. It's both of our battles, and the only way we can win is if we fight it together. Will you fight with me? She looked at him, at this prince who was willing to abdicate his own comfortable reality for a chance at a true and just future. She saw in his eyes not the arrogance of a ruler, but the courage of a man. The man she had fallen in love with. The impossible walls between them, built by history and pain, were finally beginning to crumble. Tears streamed down her face, but this time they were not tears of sorrow. They were tears of a fierce, liberating hope. Yes, she breathed. Yes, Alex, I will fight with you. Their alliance, forged in the quiet intimacy of the bakery, transformed them from a star-crossed couple into a team of quiet revolutionaries. They knew they were facing a formidable enemy. Harrington had spent a lifetime building a web of power and influence within the palace. To challenge him, they would need more than just the truth. They would need irrefutable proof. Their first move was to secure an ally within the palace. Marcus, Alastair said, his mind already working strategically. The retired Royal Guard captain. He was my father's friend, but he is a man of honor. He always disliked Harrington. If anyone can help us access the sealed archives, it is him. They met with Marcus in a clandestine location, a quiet tavern on the city's outskirts. Alastair laid out the entire story, the secret brother, his father's betrayal, Harrington's treachery. The old captain listened, his face growing grimmer with each word. I always knew there was something rotten about that business with your father, Sarah, Marcus said, his voice a low rumble. The evidence was too neat, the conviction too swift. He looked at Alastair, his eyes full of a new respect. This is a dangerous game you're playing, Your Highness. To challenge Harrington is to challenge the very structure of the court. The structure is rotten. Alastair replied, It is time for it to fall. Then I am with you, Marcus declared, his loyalty clear. I still have friends within the palace guard. I can get you into the royal archives, but you will have only one chance and only one night to find what you are looking for. While Alastair planned the infiltration, Sarah began her own, quieter investigation. She knew that Harrington's power was built on a network of favors and blackmail. She started to listen to the whispers of the city, using the network of servants, merchants, and common folk who were invisible to the court, but who saw and heard everything. She was hunting for Harrington's other secrets, the other lives he had ruined, the other truths he had buried. The night of the infiltration was a nerve-wracking affair. Guided by Marcus, Alastair slipped back into the palace, a ghost in his own home. He moved through the silent, moonlit corridors, his heart pounding, until he reached the heavy, iron-bound door of the royal archives. Marcus dealt with the guards, and Alastair was inside. The room was a vast, cold cavern of history, filled with the scent of old parchment and secrets. He had one night to find a single sealed file from 15 years ago. He worked by the light of a small, shielded lantern, his hands scanning the endless rows of labeled boxes. Hours passed. The palace began to stir with the first signs of dawn. He was about to give up, his hope fading, when he found it. A small, unassuming box, tucked away in a mislabeled section. The seal was that of the king himself. His hands trembling, he broke it. Inside was everything. the coerced witness statements, the forged documents created by Harrington, and, most damning of all, a series of letters between Harrington and the dissident nobles, proving that Harrington himself had been the one orchestrating the plot, using Sarah's father as the perfect scapegoat to eliminate a rival and solidify his own power with the king. He had it. The proof. As the first rays of sunlight streamed through the high, dusty window of the archives, Alistair knew that the battle for the truth and for his future with Sarah had just begun. Alistair slipped out of the palace as the city was just beginning to wake, the incriminating file hidden beneath his commoner's tunic. He felt not like a prince, but like a spy, a fugitive in his own kingdom. The weight of the documents was a physical thing, a heavy burden of truth that could either liberate them or condemn them all. He met Sarah in the pre-dawn quiet of her bakery. The aroma of yeast and warm bread was a comforting contrast to the cold, musty air of the archives. She was waiting for him, her face pale with anxiety, her hands covered in a light dusting of flour. "Did you find it?" she asked, her voice a hushed whisper the moment he walked through the door. He didn't speak. He just placed the file on the large wooden kneading table between them. She opened it, her eyes scanning the faded ink of the 15-year-old documents. He watched as her expression shifted from anxious hope to a slow, burning, righteous anger. She saw the lies, the forged signatures, the cold, calculated treachery that had destroyed her father. "He framed him," she whispered, her fingers tracing a line in one of Harrington's letters. "It was him, all of it." "Yes," Alistair said, his own voice tight with a shared fury. "He used your father to eliminate a political rival and to solidify his own power. My father, the king, he was a pawn in Harrington's game, just as your father was." They stood in the quiet bakery for a long time, the truth of the past a palpable presence in the room. The injustice was no longer a suspicion, it was a documented fact. "What do we do now?" Sarah asked, looking up at him, her eyes shining with unshed tears. "If you take this to your father, Harrington will deny everything. He will say you forged these documents to protect me, to clear my family's name because you are involved with me." "She's right," he admitted, the bitter truth of court politics a familiar taste. Harrington's word and 40 years of service, against the word of his rebellious son and the disgraced daughter of a traitor. My father will choose the path of least resistance. He will choose to keep the peace, to bury the scandal. "So we can't go to the king," Sarah said, her strategic mind already working. "And we can't go to the royal council, because Harrington controls half of them." "No," Alistair said, a new hard light in his eyes. "We don't go to them. We go around them. We go to the people." Sarah looked at him, surprised. "The people? Alex, this isn't a fairy tale. The common folk don't have a voice in the politics of the court." "They do if someone gives them one," he countered. "The Lyrian delegation arrives in 1 week. The official betrothal ceremony is scheduled for the day after. It will be the biggest public event of the year. The entire court, every noble family, and every foreign ambassador will be there. It will be broadcast across the kingdom." He looked at her, a daring, dangerous plan forming in his mind. "That is our stage. That is where we will tell the truth. You want to expose this in the middle of your own engagement ceremony?" she asked, stunned by the sheer audacity of the idea. "Alistair, that's not just a political scandal. It's a declaration of war. You'll be turning your back on the alliance, on your duty, on everything." "My duty," he said, his voice ringing with a conviction he had never felt before, "is to the truth. It's to the honor of your father's name, and it's to the future of a kingdom that deserves a ruler who is not afraid of his own history." He took her hands, his grip firm. "This is our only chance, Sarah. We present the evidence publicly, where it cannot be denied or buried. We let the court of public opinion be our judge." She looked at him, at the fire in his eyes, at the prince who was willing to burn down his own comfortable future for a chance at a just one. The fear was still there, a cold knot in her stomach, but it was overshadowed by a fierce, soaring pride. She had fallen in love with a man, and she was discovering he was also a king. "Okay," she said, her voice a steady whisper. "We do it, but we have to be perfect. One mistake, one misstep, and Harrington will crush us." The week leading up to the betrothal ceremony was the most intense of their lives. They became true co-conspirators, their small bakery apartment a secret headquarters for their quiet revolution. Alastair, using his princely knowledge, created a detailed map of the ceremony's protocols, the schedule, the placement of the guards. He identified the single 5-minute window after the official signing of the betrothal treaty, but before the final toasts, where he would be expected to give a speech. That would be their moment. Sarah, in the meantime, focused on the evidence. She knew the original documents were too dangerous to transport. She spent 2 days and nights painstakingly transcribing every letter, every forged report, by hand. She created a narrative, a clear, compelling story of Harrington's betrayal, supported by the irrefutable proof of his own words. She also continued her own, quieter investigation, gathering stories from other families who had been quietly ruined or blackmailed by Harrington over the years, creating a chorus of silent witnesses. Their work was a dance of trust and intimacy. They would work for hours in a focused silence, the only sounds the scratching of her pen and the rustling of his maps. Then, they would break for a simple meal, sharing bread and cheese at her small table, their conversation shifting from political strategy to their own hopes and fears. In these quiet moments, the last of the walls between them came down. He told her about his lonely childhood, about the crushing weight of being a prince. She told him about her dreams of traveling, of seeing the world beyond the palace walls, a world she only knew from books. "After this is over," he said to her one night, his voice a low promise. "Wherever you want to go, we'll go together." "Is that a royal decree, Your Highness?" she had teased, a soft smile on her face. "No," he had replied, his eyes full of a love that was now simple and clear. "It's a personal one." On the eve of the ceremony, everything was in place. Alastair had arranged for Marcus and a small, loyal contingent of the Royal Guard to be strategically placed near the podium. Sarah had prepared a small, discreet portfolio containing her transcribed evidence. They had one shot to change the course of history. That night, in the quiet of her apartment, a wave of fear washed over Sarah. "What if we're wrong, Alex?" she whispered, the weight of their plan suddenly feeling immense. "What if this destroys everything? What if your father disowns you? What if the people don't believe us?" He pulled her into his arms, holding her tight. "Then we will face it together," he said, his voice a steady anchor in her sea of doubt. "We have the truth on our side, Sarah, and you taught me that the truth is the only thing worth fighting for." He tilted her chin up, forcing her to look at him. "I am not afraid. Not as long as I have you." She looked into his eyes and saw not a prince or a rebel, but the man she loved, a man who was willing to risk his kingdom for her and for the honor of a good man's name. The fear did not vanish, but it was joined by a powerful, unwavering resolve. "Okay," she said, her voice clear and strong. "Let's go start a revolution." The grand ballroom of the Eldoria Palace was a breathtaking spectacle of power and wealth. Sunlight streamed through the high, arched windows, glinting off of gold leaf and crystal chandeliers. The air was thick with the scent of lilies and the murmur of 100 conversations as the noble families of Eldoria and the visiting delegation from Lyria mingled. Alastair stood beside his father, the king, on the main dais, a polite, princely smile fixed on his face. He looked every bit the part of the dutiful heir, but inside, his heart was a pounding drum. Across the room he saw Princess Isolde, his intended bride, looking regal and beautiful, and as cold as a marble statue. Sarah was not in the main ballroom. She was where she was always meant to be, hidden in plain sight. Dressed in the simple, almost invisible uniform of a palace servant, she moved through the crowd, carrying a tray of refreshments. No one gave her a second glance. She was just a maid, a part of the scenery. But her eyes were sharp, observant, and under her apron, tucked securely in a hidden pocket, was the portfolio containing the truth that could bring the whole glittering facade crashing down. Their plan was in motion. Marcus was in position near the side of the dais. The loyal guards were in place. All they had to do was wait for the right moment. The ceremony began. The treaties were signed. The king gave a speech about the glorious future of the two united kingdoms. Lord Harrington stood beside him, his face a mask of smug satisfaction. He had won. The rebellious prince had been brought to heel. The alliance was secure. His own power was absolute. Finally, the royal chamberlain announced, "And now, a few words from His Royal Highness Prince Alastair." This was it. Alastair stepped forward to the podium. He looked out at the sea of expectant faces. He saw his father, he saw Princess Isolde, he saw Lord Harrington, and then his eyes found hers. Sarah was standing near the back of the room, by a service door, her face calm, her dark eyes full of an unshakable strength. She gave him a single, almost imperceptible nod. He took a deep breath and began to speak. But the words he said were not the polite, diplomatic platitudes everyone was expecting. "My lords, my ladies, honored guests," he began, his voice ringing through the silent ballroom. "We are here today to celebrate an alliance, a union meant to secure the future of our kingdom. But I cannot speak of the future without first speaking of the past, for a kingdom that does not acknowledge its own history, that does not honor the truth, has no future at all." A confused murmur rippled through the crowd. The king frowned. Harrington's smile faltered. 15 years ago, Alastair continued, his voice gaining power, a good and loyal man in the service of the crown was accused of treason. His name was erased, his family shamed, and his honor destroyed. It has long been the official story that he was a traitor who sought to destabilize the throne. Today, I am here to tell you that the official story is a lie. The silence that fell over the grand ballroom was no longer one of polite attentiveness. It was a sharp, collective intake of breath, a silence thick with shock and disbelief. Prince Alastair had not just gone off script, he had taken the script, torn it into pieces, and set it on fire in the middle of his own betrothal. King Theron, who had been beaming with regal satisfaction just moments before, was now ashen-faced, his hand gripping the arm of his throne. Princess Isolde's perfect diplomatic smile had frozen on her face. And Lord Harrington, a flicker of pure, cold fury flashed in his eyes before being quickly masked by a look of concerned confusion. "Alastair," the king said, his voice a low, warning rumble. "What is the meaning of this?" Alastair did not look at his father. He kept his gaze fixed on the assembled court, his voice ringing with a clarity that commanded attention. "The meaning, father, is that for too long a great injustice has been allowed to stand as truth in this kingdom. The man I speak of, a groundskeeper named Thomas, was not a traitor. He was a hero. He was a man who discovered a dangerous truth and tried to bring it to the light, and for his loyalty, he was silenced." A wave of frantic whispers swept through the crowd. The older nobles, the ones who remembered the scandal from 15 years ago, exchanged nervous, significant glances. "This is preposterous." Lord Harrington finally boomed, stepping forward. He turned to the king, his face a mask of feigned concern. "Your Majesty, I fear the prince is unwell. The pressures of his duties, they have clearly taken their toll." He then turned to the royal guards. "Captain, perhaps you should escort His Highness to his chambers to rest." It was a brilliant move, an attempt to frame Alastair's rebellion as a bout of madness, to dismiss the truth as the ravings of an unstable mind. The two guards at the front of the dais took a hesitant step forward. "I am perfectly well, Harrington," Alastair said, his voice dangerously calm. "And I am not finished." He looked at the guards who had served him since he was a boy. "Stand down." The guards froze, caught between the command of the prince and the authority of the king's chief advisor. "And as for the truth," Alastair continued, his eyes locking onto Harrington's, "I did not come here today with mere accusations. I came with proof." This was the moment. Alastair's gaze swept the back of the room, finding her. Sarah. She'd been moving slowly, discreetly through the crowd, her servant's uniform the perfect camouflage. Now she began to walk forward, no longer a ghost, but a woman with a purpose. The crowd parted for her, a sea of silk and jewels making way for a simple maid in gray. The whispers grew louder. "Who is she? What is a servant doing?" She walked with her head held high, her expression calm and resolute. In her hands she held the simple portfolio. She walked up the steps of the dais, and in an act of breathtaking defiance she stood not behind the prince but beside him. "This is madness," Harrington sputtered, his composure finally cracking. "A common servant. What is she doing up there? Guards, remove her." "She is not a common servant," Alastair said, his voice a protective shield around her. "She is Seraphina, the daughter of the man you condemned, and she is here to finish the story her father started." He took the portfolio from her hands. 15 years ago, he announced, Serafina's father was accused of treason based on evidence that was presented as irrefutable. Today, we will see that evidence for what it truly was. He opened the portfolio. This, he said, holding up a transcribed letter, is a communication between Lord Harrington and the very same dissident nobles my father's loyal groundskeeper was accused of conspiring with. In this letter, Harrington himself outlines a plan to create a necessary diversion to consolidate his power within the council. A collective gasp went through the room. The king looked at Harrington, a dawning horror on his face. "These are forgeries," Harrington shouted, his face now a mottled red. "The desperate lies of a disgraced family and a lovesick prince." "Are they?" Alastair asked calmly. "Then perhaps you can explain this." He held up another document. "This is the original coerced witness statement from a palace guard, a man who later died under mysterious circumstances. And here in the margin is a note in your own hand, Harrington, detailing the incentive he was to receive for his testimony." He didn't need to say more. The proof was there, in the cold, hard facts of the documents. But Sarah knew that facts alone were not enough to win the hearts of the people. This was her moment. She stepped forward to the podium. "My lords, my ladies," she began, her voice not loud, but clear and steady, carrying a weight of truth that silenced every corner of the room. "You see me as a maid, and it is true, that is my station. I have served in your great houses, I have cleaned your floors, I have lived a life of invisibility. And it is from that invisibility that I have learned to see things that are often overlooked." She looked out at the faces of the court, not with anger, but with a profound, sad wisdom. "I know what it is to be judged by your clothes and not by your character. My father knew that too. He was a simple man, a man who loved the soil, who believed in loyalty, who believed in his king. He did not seek power or influence. He sought only to do what was right, and for that, his life was destroyed." Tears were now openly streaming down her face, but her voice did not waver. "You look at me and you see a servant, but I am also a daughter who has spent 15 years living with the shame of a crime her father did not commit. A daughter who has had to hide her own history, her own name, for fear of the power of the man who stands among you today." She turned and looked directly at Harrington, her gaze a fiery indictment. "You did not just condemn my father, Lord Harrington. You condemned my entire family to a life of shadows. You stole our name, you stole our home, you stole our honor." Then, she turned back to the court, her voice rising with a passion that was breathtaking. "This is not just about my father. This is about the kind of kingdom we want to live in. Do we want a kingdom built on secret deals and buried truths? Do we want a kingdom where a good man's loyalty is rewarded with exile and shame? Or do we want a kingdom where the truth matters? Where honor is more than just a word whispered in a throne room?" The silence that followed was absolute, profound. It was no longer about a political scandal. It was about the very soul of the kingdom. The first person to move was an old, respected duchess, a woman known for her fierce integrity. She stood up, her back straight, and began to clap, slowly, deliberately. Then another noble stood, and another. Within a minute, the entire ballroom, with the exception of Harrington's small, terrified faction, was on its feet. The sound of their applause a thunderous roar of affirmation, a verdict delivered not by a judge, but by the collective conscience of the court. King Theron, his face a mask of grief and dawning understanding, finally looked at Lord Harrington, the man he had trusted for 40 years. And for the first time, he saw him not as an advisor, but as the snake he truly was. "Harrington," the king said, his voice a low, dangerous command, "you are relieved of your duties. You will be confined to your quarters under guard, pending a full and public investigation by the Royal Council." Harrington stood frozen, his face a picture of disbelief. His empire of lies had crumbled in a matter of minutes. As the royal guards, led by a grim-faced Marcus, moved to escort him from the room, Harrington shot one last, venomous look at Alastair and Sarah. It was a look of pure, unadulterated hatred, a promise of a revenge yet to come. As Harrington was led away, the king slowly descended from the dais. He walked not to his son, but directly to Serafina. He stood before the young maid, the woman who had brought his kingdom to the brink of chaos in order to save it. "Miss," he began, his voice thick with a humility no one had ever heard from him before. On behalf of the crown, and on behalf of my family, I offer you my deepest, most profound apology. We have done your family a great and terrible wrong, a wrong that we will now spend the rest of our days trying to right." He then did something that made the entire court gasp. King Theron of Eldoria, the most powerful man in the kingdom, bowed, a deep, formal, and utterly sincere bow, not to a princess or a duchess, but to a simple maid who had dared to speak the truth. Alistair watched, his heart full to bursting. He looked at Sarah, who was accepting the king's apology with a quiet, tearful grace. The battle was won, her father's name was cleared, the truth had been told. But as he looked around the chaotic, buzzing ballroom, at the shocked faces of the Lyrian delegation, at his intended bride, Princess Isolde, who was staring at him as if he were a complete stranger, he knew that the revolution had only just begun. He had saved his honor, but he had almost certainly lost his throne. And he realized, with a clarity that was both terrifying and liberating, that he didn't care. The only kingdom he wanted to rule was the one he could build with the woman standing beside him. The grand ballroom, which had been the stage for a spectacular political explosion, was now a chaotic whirlwind of frantic diplomacy. The betrothal ceremony was in shambles. The Lyrian delegation, led by a stone-faced King Darius, had retreated to a corner, their expressions a mixture of shock and diplomatic fury. The nobles of Eldoria were huddled in small buzzing groups, trying to process the seismic shift that had just occurred. In the eye of the storm stood Alistair and Sarah. For a moment, they were an island of calm in the chaos. The battle was over, the truth was out, but the future was a vast, terrifyingly blank page. "Well," Sarah whispered, a small shaky smile on her face, "I don't think you'll be marrying Princess Isolde today." "No," Alistair agreed, a strange lightness in his chest despite the surrounding turmoil. "I believe that ship has sailed, crashed into an iceberg, and sunk to the bottom of the ocean." Their moment of quiet victory was interrupted by King Theron, who approached them with a heavy, weary tread. His face was etched with a decade of guilt, but his eyes, when he looked at his son, held a new, fragile respect. "Alistair," he said, his voice a low rumble. "You and I, and you, young lady," he added, turning to Sarah, "we have much to discuss. But first, I have a diplomatic fire to put out. Harrington's treachery has not just shamed our family, it has jeopardized the stability of this entire region." He then walked towards the Lyrian delegation, a king preparing to do the one thing he had never been good at: humble negotiation. Left alone, Alistair and Sarah looked at each other. "What happens now?" she asked. "I have no idea," he admitted, and for the first time, the not knowing felt less like a failure and more like a freedom. He took her hand. "But whatever it is, we face it together." They spent the next few hours in a small private antechamber, waiting as the political machinery of the palace ground into motion. They could hear the raised voices from the king's private council room, the frantic footsteps of messengers in the hallways. Their quiet revolution had thrown the entire kingdom into a state of flux. In their small, quiet room, however, they found a sense of peace. They talked, not about politics or thrones, but about their future. A future that, for the first time, felt truly their own. "I don't want to be a prince," Alistair confessed, the words a release of a lifetime of burden. "Not like this. The crown. It's been a weight, not an honor. I want to build something, Sarah. Something real. Something with you." "And what about the hotel?" she asked, a gentle tease in her voice. "Are you going to go back to being Alex, the clumsy stable hand?" He laughed, a real, easy sound. "Maybe. Or maybe we open our own bakery. I hear you have some experience in that area." She smiled, her heart full. "I think," she said softly, "that I would like that very much." Late that afternoon, a royal guard entered their room. "His Majesty the King requests your presence in the throne room." The throne room was no longer filled with the glittering court. It was empty save for 3 figures. King Theron sat on the grand throne, looking older and more tired than Alistair had ever seen him. Standing beside him was a surprisingly calm Princess Isolde. And on the other side was Sarah's father, Thomas, who had been brought from his modest home in the city. He stood tall, his face a mixture of disbelief and a quiet, profound vindication. Sarah gasped when she saw him, and she ran across the vast room, throwing her arms around her father. "Papa," she cried, tears of joy streaming down her face. "My girl," he said, his own voice thick with emotion, holding her tight. "You did it. You brought the truth home. Alistair watched them, his own eyes misty. This was the true victory, not the fall of Harrington, but the restoration of this good man's honor. Alistair, the king said, his voice echoing in the silent room. Alistair approached, standing before his father, not as a rebellious son, but as a man. The alliance with Lyria is under review, the king said. Princess Isolde and her father have been made aware of the full extent of Harrington's deceit. They are, understandably, reconsidering their position. Princess Isolde stepped forward. She was still regal, but the cold, diplomatic mask was gone. She looked at Alistair, and for the first time he saw not a political pawn, but a woman. Your Highness, she said, her voice clear and firm. What you did today, it was reckless, it was chaotic, it was politically disastrous. She paused. It was also the most honorable thing I have ever witnessed. Eldoria does not need an alliance with Lyria if it has a future king with your courage. We will return to our kingdom, and my father and I will reconsider our treaty. But know this, you have earned our respect. She then turned to Sarah and gave a small, genuine bow. And you, madam, have the heart of a queen. With that, she turned and gracefully exited the throne room, leaving a stunned silence in her wake. King Theron then turned his attention to Thomas. Thomas, he said, his voice heavy with regret. There are no words to undo the injustice I have done to you and your family. I was blinded by a man I trusted, and I allowed my own fear to make me a fool. I hereby declare, before the crown and the kingdom, that you are cleared of all charges of treason. Your name is restored, your lands, your titles, your honor, they are all returned to you with the deepest apologies of a humbled king. He then looked at his son. Alistair, you have defied me. You have thrown this kingdom into chaos. You have broken every protocol and every tradition. He stood up from his throne, and you have made me more proud than I have ever been in my entire life. You have shown me what it means to be a true king, not a ruler who clings to power, but one who fights for the truth. He walked over to Alistair and placed his hands on his son's shoulders. The throne is yours when you are ready for it, but you will not rule alone. He looked over at Sarah, who was standing with her father, her face a beautiful mixture of tears and joy. You will rule with the woman who taught you how to be a king. Alistair was speechless. He had been prepared to lose everything. He had never imagined he would gain it all back, but on new terms. On his terms. Father, he began, but the king held up a hand. There is much to rebuild, he said. Harrington's network of spies and corruption runs deep. It will take time to heal the wounds he has inflicted on this kingdom, but for the first time in a long time, I have hope, because of you two. The weeks that followed were a time of profound change for the kingdom of Eldoria. The investigation into Harrington's crimes revealed a web of deceit that was even more extensive than they had imagined. But with each lie that was brought to light, the kingdom seemed to breathe a little easier, to stand a little taller. Sarah's family was restored to their ancestral home, a beautiful, sprawling farmhouse on the edge of the royal estates. But Sarah did not stay there. She stayed in her small apartment above the bakery. This is my home, she had told Alistair when he asked her to move to the palace. The palace is your world. I will visit, I will support you, but I need a place that is just mine. He had understood, and he had loved her even more for it. Their relationship found a new, beautiful rhythm. He was a prince, burdened with the immense task of helping his father reform a kingdom. She was a commoner, a baker's assistant who was now a national hero, a quiet advisor to the future king. They would meet in secret, in her small apartment, or for long walks in the woods on the edge of the estate. They were two people from different worlds, building a bridge between them, one honest conversation at a time. He would come to her, exhausted from a day of council meetings, and she would ground him, her common-sense wisdom a balm to his soul. She would feel overwhelmed by the attention, by the weight of her new, unofficial role, and he would comfort her, his quiet strength a shield against the world. One evening, about a month after the ceremony, he came to her apartment. He wasn't wearing his princely robes. He was wearing the simple, rough-spun clothes of a stable hand. He was carrying a bag of flour over his shoulder. "What is this?" she asked, laughing. "You taught me how to be a king," he said, setting the flour down on her table. "Now, I was hoping you could teach me how to bake bread." She looked at him, at this incredible, humble, wonderful man, and her heart was so full she thought it might burst. "On one condition," she said, her eyes twinkling. "Anything. You have to promise me," she said, dusting a little flour on his nose, "that you will never, ever be boring." He laughed, a deep, joyful sound that filled her small kitchen. "Sarah," he said, pulling her into his arms, "I have a feeling that with you, my life will be many things, but it will never, ever be boring." He leaned in to kiss her, and she knew, with an absolute certainty, that this was it. This was their story. Not a fairy tale of a prince and a maid, but a real, messy, beautiful story of two people who had fought for the truth, and in doing so, had found a love that could rebuild a kingdom. The kingdom of Eldoria, under the quiet, steady guidance of its future king and his unconventional advisor, began to heal. The changes were not loud or dramatic, but they were profound. Alistair, with Sarah's wisdom as his constant compass, initiated a series of reforms that were unheard of. He established a royal council of commoners, made up of merchants, farmers, and artisans, to advise the crown directly. He used the royal treasury to fund public works projects, new schools, clean water systems for the outer villages, and a grand public library in the capital city, which he named the Thomas Memorial Library in honor of Sarah's father. He was not just a prince anymore. He was a statesman, a true leader of the people, and the people loved him for it. Sarah, for her part, refused any official title. She was not a duchess, not a lady of the court. She was simply Sarah, the woman who had the prince's ear, and more importantly, his heart. She became a powerful advocate for the common folk, a bridge between the palace and the people. She would spend her days listening to their concerns in the city's markets, and her evenings discussing them with Alistair over simple meals in her small apartment. They were a team, a partnership, that was quietly and effectively reshaping the very fabric of the kingdom. Their love story, once a dangerous secret, became a beloved national legend. The tale of the disguised prince and the wise maid who knew the truth was told in taverns, sung by bards, and whispered in nurseries. They were a symbol of a new kind of Eldoria, one built on truth, honor, and a love that transcended class and station. About a year after the dramatic betrothal ceremony, Alistair knew the time had come. He had spent the year not just reforming his kingdom, but proving his love. He had learned to bake bread, badly. He had learned the names of all the stray cats in Sarah's neighborhood. He had learned that true happiness was not found in the grandeur of a palace, but in the quiet, simple moments they shared. He didn't plan a grand public proposal. He knew that wasn't their story. Instead, one crisp autumn evening, he came to her apartment. He wasn't dressed as a prince. He was dressed as Alex, the man she had first met. In his hands, he carried not a velvet box with a diamond ring, but a single, perfect, wild rose, the kind that grew on the edge of the palace estates where she had grown up. "Sarah," he said, his voice quiet and full of a love that was now steady and sure. "A year ago, I was a prince running from a crown. You were a maid running from a past we both thought was impossible to overcome. We have fought for the truth, we have rebuilt a kingdom, and we have found in each other a home." He got down on one knee, right there on the worn wooden floor of her small book-filled room. "I don't have a strategic alliance to offer you," he said, a gentle, self-deprecating smile on his face. "I don't have a political treaty. All I have is my heart, which is, and always will be, completely and irrevocably yours." He held out the rose. "Serafina, the bravest, wisest, most wonderful woman I have ever known. Will you do me the profound honor of being my wife, my partner, my queen?" Tears streamed down her face as she took the rose. "A queen, Alex," she whispered. "I'm just a baker's assistant." "You are the queen of my heart," he replied, his own eyes misty. "And you will be the greatest queen this kingdom has ever known, because you have already earned the love of its people." "Yes," she said, her voice a joyful, tearful whisper. "Yes, Alex, I will marry you." He slid a simple, elegant ring onto her finger, a ring he had designed himself, with a lion and a rose intertwined, the royal seal of Eldoria, but also the symbol of their own unique story. Their wedding was a celebration of everything they had become. It was held not in the grand cathedral, but in the open air, on a hill overlooking the city, with the palace on one side and the sprawling neighborhoods of the common folk on the other. Everyone was invited. Nobles stood beside farmers, merchants danced with ladies of the court. It was a true wedding of the people. Sarah did not wear a crown of jewels, she wore a crown of wildflowers. And as they were pronounced husband and wife, a cheer went up that seemed to shake the very foundations of the city, a joyful roar of a kingdom that was finally, truly, united. Queen Seraphina of Eldoria was unlike any queen the kingdom had ever seen. She held council meetings in the palace kitchens, believing that the best ideas were born over a warm loaf of bread. She transformed the stuffy ladies-in-waiting into a dynamic team of social advocates. She taught the royal children, their own, a son with his father's thoughtful eyes and a daughter with her mother's mischievous spirit, that true royalty was measured not in titles but in kindness. King Alastair ruled beside her, a true partner in every sense of the word. He was a wise and just king, beloved by his people, not because of his birthright, but because of the honor he had fought so hard to reclaim. He never forgot the lessons he had learned as Alex, the stable hand. He ruled with a humility and an understanding that had been born in the stables of the Grand Majestic Hotel. Lord Harrington spent the rest of his days in a quiet, comfortable exile, a forgotten relic of a bygone era. King Theron, in his final years, found a quiet peace, watching his son and his remarkable daughter-in-law build a kingdom that was stronger and truer than he could have ever imagined. Their love story became the foundational myth of the new Eldoria. A story that was told to every child, a reminder that courage can be found in the most unexpected of places, that truth is always worth fighting for, and that sometimes the greatest love stories are not about a prince saving a commoner, but about two people saving each other. One evening, many years later, an elderly King Alastair and Queen Seraphina were sitting on a balcony of the palace, watching their grandchildren play in the gardens below. "Do you ever miss it?" she asked, her hand resting on his. "The quiet life? The bakery?" He turned to her, his love for her as clear and as bright as it had been on the day he first saw her in the stables. "I have never had a quiet life with you, my love," he said, a familiar, playful twinkle in his eye. "And I wouldn't have it any other way." He looked out at the peaceful, prosperous kingdom they had built together. "But you know, I do sometimes miss the smell of your baking." She smiled, a slow, beautiful smile that still made his heart skip a beat. "Then it's a good thing," she said, "that I had a small secret oven installed in the royal chambers." He laughed, a deep, joyful sound that echoed through the gardens. Their life was a testament to a simple, profound truth. The greatest kingdoms are not built on power or politics, but on the enduring, revolutionary, and life-changing power of love. What did you think of the story of Prince Alastair and Seraphina? On a scale of 0 to 10, how would you rate their journey to a new kind of royalty? Let us know your thoughts in the comments. And for everyone who has stayed with us until the very end, who believes that a true crown is made of honor and love, please comment, "Long live the Queen." We are so grateful to share these stories with you. Thank you for watching, and don't forget to subscribe for more narratives that will change the world.